All right, hello everybody. This is Chris Addick with the Veterans Law Blog. I want to welcome you to episode number 10 of our Facebook video livecast. Got a couple of changes you might have noticed. First of all, you probably noticed the big long gap there.
This is Chris Addick with the Veterans Law Blog. I want to welcome you to episode number 10 of our Facebook video livecast. Got a couple of changes you might have noticed. First of all, you probably noticed the big long gap.
Oh my Lord, this is going to be bad. That change is not going to work.
Episode number 10 of our Facebook video livecast.
Hold on one second, folks. We got a technical issue here. I'm going to work through it. All right. Good deal. We're going to have to edit that out of the final recording video. So hopefully y'all can hear me okay. If not, somebody send me an email. Send it to podcast@veteranslawblog.org. Podcast. If it's really, really horrible video or you don't have sound, that's the only email I can see right here. I'm trying to do some technical things different on this video because I've gotten some feedback that y'all would really like some better audio. So we will see if I can pull that off here today. So I've got that email opened up. If you would just send me an email to that address, podcast@veteranslawblog.org, and hopefully I will be able to get that adjusted on the fly. So in any event, what we're going to talk about here today, got a bunch of stuff coming. While we're waiting for everybody to pop on into the streaming here, I wanted to talk you through what this is all about. So the Veterans Law Blog, this is our 10th anniversary. So 2007, I started working with a small group of veterans to try to teach them how to improve their own VA disability claims. As a newly accredited VA attorney, I was just learning this process myself and figured I would share it with my fellow veterans. So I started hearing from some of these veterans that they were having tremendous success in their own VA claims and appeals. So we started doing a blog format. And the blog grew and grew and grew. And y'all told me that you wanted more information and more in-depth information. So started publishing some books, some ebooks and a couple of paper books on different VA claims topics. That continued to be very popular, and y'all emailed me and wrote and said, listen, we need video learning too. Not all of us like to read PDF files online, and not all of us are big fans of paper books either, and we only have 2 of our books are in paper format only out of the 14. So started doing a lot of video training. It continues to grow and expand, and it has become a pretty significant project. I think last time I looked at it, we had over 1 million veterans visit the Veterans Law Blog last year. And that puts a huge strain on resources, so we've had to go to a member-supported format. So the Veterans Law Blog is 100% member-supported. There's 2 levels of membership. There's a monthly membership, and there's an annual membership. Both of them get the same benefits. They both get a free 7-day trial on the blog. You can look around and see thousands of posts, all sorts of video trainings available there. There's some additional video courses and books that you can purchase that are outside of the blog membership. But as a premium member, you get access to thousands of posts, several hours of training videos. You're also going to get a 20% discount on any other purchase through the blog. And all of that money doesn't go into Chris Addick's pocket or doesn't go into making anybody rich. If I wanted to get rich, I'd run for Congress. Where that money goes is into producing video content just like this, just like the webinar that I'm about to tell you about. Our second webinar is coming up, and to maintain all the services and data hosting and website and all the coding and all the website development and design that needs to be done to keep this thing going. It's become a pretty significantly expensive project, and used to be I could pay it out of my own pocket, but now it's gotten so big that I'm going to a member-supported format. So to all of you that are premium members of the blog, thank you for your support, and thank you for continuing to make this resource available to more and more veterans. So we've got a little different backdrop here today. Usually is the Arkansas State Capitol. My goal was I'd like to tell you that I had something really cool I wanted you to see back here. If you look kind of off in the distance, you can see the new bridges they're building down over the Arkansas River. And it's a big deal here, but a bridge is a bridge is a bridge, right? The real reason we shifted up the viewpoint here is to get a little bit better audio and to get a little better lighting. So if you are not seeing good lighting, good audio, send me an email right now at podcast, PODCAST @veteranslawblog.org, and I will see if I can adjust things on the fly. So let's jump right in. This video livecast expected to last a little over an hour. I always say 45 minutes to an hour, and then I end up yakking for a good hour, hour and a half. So in any event, we're going to talk about some great things today. The very first thing that we're going to talk about, I want to tell you about something cool that I discovered this week, and then we're going to jump into news and announcements. Not all veterans news, not all military news. We're going to talk about news that's particularly important to veterans and their benefits claims. So we're really going to focus heavily on that kind of news. There's not always a lot of news, so we can get a little bit more in depth in understanding what's going on. Then we're going to move on to our main topic. Main topic is a veterans law issue, a claims or an appeals issue, a process issue, something that helps you to build a better VA claim. I'm going to teach you something about the law, how to build some evidence, how to get and find the best evidence, how to do all these different things. We'll spend about 15, 20 minutes, maybe even a half an hour talking about a main topic. Today's main topic is going to be about a condition that plagues a lot of veterans. In fact, twice as many veterans as civilians, and we'll talk about that. Service-connecting claims for obesity here in a moment. The next section after that, I'm going to answer questions that y'all send in. So go to veteranslawblog.org/Facebook Live. I think that's the website. Yes, it is. And submit your questions. I go through all of those questions, and what I'm looking for are questions that a lot of you have in common. So if I'm looking for a question that's asked, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, in some format or another. So that way I'm sure that what I'm telling you is something that's of broad interest. So please submit your questions, submit your requests at veteranslawblog.org/Facebook Live, and we'll answer up to, try to get into about 5. Today we're going to do about 3 because I think I'm going to spend a little bit longer on the main topic than normal. So once we get through the questions and answers that y'all are sending in, then what we'll do at that point, I'm going to give you some coupon codes to use on the Veterans Law blog. So as a reward for listening to Attig blather on for an hour and a half, you're going to get some discounts on things you purchase. Today's discounts have to do with an annual membership and our video training C-File course. So stick around a little bit to the end of the video. After the video is done, a couple things happen. The very first thing is it shows up on our Facebook page, and it stays up there for a good bit of time. We're going to have to take some of the older ones down at some point, just for storage issues, storage reasons. But in any event, it's going to be up there, and currently all 10, after this one, all 10 will be up there still. So if you look in the first comments below the video, you're going to see what I call the show notes. Those will be there after the recording is done. And those show notes contain links to any websites I mentioned. They contain any names of people that I refer to, any blog posts that I specifically shout out about, or any books or products that are on the blog that I talk about. They're going to be linked in there, and you can also pull the coupon codes out of that comment section as well. We take the video and we cross-post it on YouTube for those of you that prefer YouTube over Facebook. The only thing with the YouTube feed is that we can't put in all the links in the show notes. YouTube gets really angry at me when I do that. They think I'm trying to abuse their system, and so we just put the videos up there. I've gone around and around with them, and they just don't want to compromise on it. So we'll put the video up there, but if you want to get those, you'll have to visit the website, where usually about the middle of next week, I will have this whole video will be hosted up for all the premium members to be able to see. If you don't have a Facebook account, or if you just want to go back and watch it again and again as a premium member, I'll never take them down from the premium members section. So if you're a premium member to the blog, you can always come back and watch these videos whenever you want. And in the post with that video, we'll have the topics we cover, any of the show notes or links or references that I have there as well. So that's basically the format that we're going to follow. I'm getting some great feedback, so I really look forward to this every week. It'd be a lot better if I could have some of y'all here and we could have a lot more live interaction, but someday maybe, someday. For now, I really thank you all for the feedback on this. It's really important that you tell me what I'm doing well in it and what I'm not doing so well. That way we can continue to improve. So let me just check and see if we've gotten any context about the audio here. See if anybody said anything. Nothing. So I'm assuming all of the audio is looking good, looking great for all y'all. All right, so let's jump in. I want to tell you something. So you guys know that I've written the book on VA sleep apnea claims. What motivated that book, first as an ebook and now as a paperback book, is the recognition that the veterans community is plagued by sleep-breathing disorder problems. As I started researching it, I found this significant number, a significant percentage of veterans have a sleep apnea disorder or a medical condition related to or the consequence of sleep apnea. And as I started looking at it, I also started looking at what the board was doing. The Board of Veterans' Appeals was doing with these claims. 75% of y'all were getting denied. So I ended up writing a book, wrote an ebook. It's all out there. You can read all about sleep apnea. There's several posts on the blog as well, and you can read all about that. But when I was doing the research, I also found out that the sleep problems that veterans face aren't just related to sleep apnea. So part of coming back from military life and coming back into the civilian world is a major change in lifestyle and frankly in just our basic daily rhythms. So we go from being hard charging, especially in times of combat, hard charging, working 18, 20, sometimes 24 hours a day, not getting much sleep, working in the nighttime, eating very poorly when you're in the military, not having an opportunity to really truly exercise like we want to if we were back stateside, or if we were a civilian, we'd probably do things a little bit differently. And as a result, our body chemistry starts changing and it starts becoming harder and harder to sleep. So veterans that come back are seeing an uptick in REM sleep disorders, which mean that the deeper the sleep that the veteran goes into, the more likely they are to wake up and not get sleep. And sleep is a pretty important part of the human body. Sleeping, eating, breathing, drinking, water, not beer, but those are the pretty essential components of staying alive. And any breakdown in the body, whether it be pancreatic cancer or the common cold, any breakdown can be traced to some problem in one of those major body functions. So sleep is no different. If you go without sleep, you're going to start having heart problems. You're going to start having weight management issues. You're going to start having neurological problems to such a degree that you could progress into a severe neurological disorder. So sleep's pretty important, is my point, and I hope I've beat that dead horse enough. But we all, peacetime, combat, it doesn't matter. We've all had at one time or another difficulty getting to sleep. I myself have that same problem. I've got two teenagers in my house. I've got a little 4-year-old that's, that doesn't seem to really get the concept of sleep yet. And on top of that, I've got my business and practice, law practice, where I am constantly thinking about and worrying about what's going on with my clients and their claims and wondering how they're getting through the weeks and the days as I'm trying to push their claims forward. On top of that, I've got the same normal stressors of life, and I will tell you honestly, for the last year, I've been having a real hard time sleeping. I can't think of 2 nights in a row over the last year where I have slept the entire way through the night. Especially as we get older, we find out that we wake up earlier and earlier in the morning for some reason. But it's been difficult to put together 2 consecutive nights of good sleep. And I know a lot of you can empathize with that. And I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm not asking for any of that. There's just a lead-in to tell you something I discovered fairly recently here was a podcast called Sleep With Me. And it's called sleepwithmepodcast.com. Now, the name aside, this podcast is awesome. What this guy does is a couple, every other day, he records a podcast and you pop on your earbuds or headphones or whatever you listen to as you're falling asleep. And you just let this podcast play. And what he does, I don't know scientifically how it works. I have a guess. But what he does is he just kind of talks randomly. He's got a real soothing kind of voice. Sometimes he's funny. Sometimes it's hard to follow what he's saying. But that's the whole point. He talks, and basically his concept is he's going to bore you to sleep. And since I've been listening to this podcast, I have gotten, with one exception, we had the little one woke up in the middle of the night sick. With that exception, I've slept almost entirely through every night for the last 2 weeks. So this podcast is really helping me. Check it out, sleepwithmepodcast.com. Listen to it, give it 2 or 3 days, try it. It's kind of weird getting used to it because he's a strange agent, that guy. But what he's doing is miraculous for me, and hopefully it helps some of y'all as well. So check it out. Let me know what you think. If you're asking what a podcast is, think of it like a radio show. Except if you want to listen to a particular segment, if you want to go listen to Rush Limbaugh on the radio, or if you want to go listen to Keith Olbermann on the radio, or if you want to go listen to This American Life on NPR, whatever it is that you listen to, or, future hits of rock and roll on K107, wham. There was a little Quentin Tarantino shout out there that I completely butchered. But in any event, whatever your favorite radio show is, you've got to tune in at that time to hear it, right? Podcast is different. Podcast is streaming up in the cloud, And anytime you want to go listen to a particular show, you can listen to it whenever you want. So I listen to podcasts when I'm running. I listen to podcasts when I'm driving. You know, in the middle of the day when I'm eating my lunch, I take a break, I listen to a podcast. I like them. I enjoy them. I listen to podcasts about books. I listen to podcasts about veterans issues. I listen to podcasts about running, politics, current events, all sorts of things. There's millions of them out there, and they're really great. They're almost always free. Go to iTunes Podcast is one of the greatest places, and that's where I found sleepwithmepodcast.com, was through the iTunes Podcast recommending tool. So check it out. We actually have a podcast coming on the Veterans Law blog here in April. And this is going to be a little bit different than anything that I've done before. So normally when we get into new formats, when we start doing video training, when we start doing these live casts, and when we've done the blog in the past or emails, we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about veterans benefits and VA disability compensation claims. This podcast is going to be a little bit different because I want to expand our minds a little bit in terms of what we do here on the Veterans Law blog. And I want to do something. This has been a project I've wanted to do for a very long time, and so hopefully y'all like it. But what I'm going to talk about is the concept of reintegration. And that's a fancy word. Some people call it, the military-civilian divide. Other people call it transitioning. But it's the process by which somebody leaves the military service and comes back into civilian life. We all know that there's a significant lifestyle difference. Obviously, we all go through some sort of boot camp to have our brains and bodies and ways of thinking completely transformed to adapt to the military lifestyle. We don't have that when we come back out of the service, and so we're kind of on our own to figure things out in the civilian world, and it's a completely different beast. My own reintegration, I was peacetime vet. I got off active duty in 97 out of the reserves in 04, and it was a very difficult transition. I tell people all the time, I remember the very first morning after I got off active duty, I got up at the usual time, 4:30 in the morning, threw on my PT gear, went out to my truck, and was heading down to go work out with my unit when I realized that I'm not on active duty anymore. So, it was my first day as a civilian, and I was already completely clueless. And that was a kind of a wake-up call that I had a big change coming, and it was a tough one. It took me several years to really kind of get my feet on the ground in the civilian world. I want to share on this podcast stories of other veterans who have made that change. Now, I'm not talking about the big famous people, the folks, that run organizations or started these massive $1 million businesses. There's plenty of podcasts out there. There's plenty of places where you can see and hear those interviews. What I want to talk about and I want to talk to are everyday veterans, folks that serve in peacetime Coast Guard all the way down to, combat Navy veterans, from Korean War or World War II veterans all the way up through the present conflicts. I want to talk to all different veterans. I want to understand what it was like to make the transition. And more importantly, I want to start exploring what it really means to be a veteran. A lot of time I think civilians look at us, you see it on the TV or in the newspaper, wherever somebody's trying to, get veterans' attentions, what they do is they break out the American flag and a uniform. It's a very one-dimensional look at us, and we're all different. I mean, we've got liberals, we've got Republicans, we've got, tall veterans, we've got short veterans, we've got patriotic veterans, we've got veterans that have left the country. We've got veterans that are, conscientious objectors now and believe in peace. We've got hawks as veterans. We've got some veterans that can't stand this country. We've got some veterans that love this country. We've got a whole variety of them. And even within our community, we've got male veterans, female veterans, African American, Asian American, Hispanic American. Every different mix possible is in our community. And we're not just all about American flag and a green camo uniform. Which is, when you look at businesses trying to recruit us, they flag our attention with the flag. So I want to explore what it means to be a veteran and how that's impacted our civilian life so that we can start separating the idea that a veteran is not a soldier. The veterans have very special and distinctive needs as a community, and we're very special and distinctive people as members of that community. I'm going to start exploring this on the podcast. So if you want to be a guest, or if you know a veteran that would like to be a guest, it's really easy. I mean, all you have to do is send me an email at podcast@veteranslawblog.org. Tell me a little bit about the veteran that you want me to interview. Tell me a little bit about yourself. I want to get an understanding a little bit about what you did in the military, but a little bit more about what lessons you learned in the civilian world, things that you took away from the military that helped you, things that you wish you'd known, things that you're proud of as a civilian that you couldn't have done without military service, what it means to you to be a veteran. share with me those things, and we'll start interviewing a bunch of you. I've already done about 12.5 interviews, and we're starting to patch them all together into shows now. So shoot me an email, podcast@veteranslawblog.org. Don't send any questions about the blog there. This is kind of my safe space away from blog work. This is a special project that I'd like to work on, and we're going to launch this probably in the first or second week of April. It'll be available on iTunes. It's completely free. The podcast, there's no charge whatsoever. You can listen to it whenever you want, and we're going to dump probably between 12 and 18 episodes right out of the gate so that you can get an idea of what it's like, and then we're going to go into, my hope is a regularly weekly or bi-weekly show, and kind of expand on the concept from there. So let me know if you have any ideas. I am actively looking for a name for this podcast. I've gotten some great suggestions from folks. As you come up with ideas, I'm looking for something that sounds like it would be a veterans podcast and not necessarily a soldier's podcast, or not necessarily a Marine or a Navy. So be careful with the military lingo, but I'll tell you that whoever gives me a name that I end up using, I'm going to give you a 1-year membership free to the blog, and I'm going to give you a copy of every product and every video that we have, and you can have that for a lifetime as long as the blog exists. So I'll give you all that for free. Send in your name, suggestions, guest suggestions to podcast@veteranslawblog.org. Okay? All right, enough about the podcast then. Let's move into the news and talk a little bit about what's going on in the new VA. And I say the new VA because we've had an old VA secretary has left as of January 20th. So Bob McDonald is no longer the secretary of the VA. Sad to see him go. He was, for all his flaws and for all the problems he had, I think he was the best VA secretary that we've ever had. Certainly the most transparent, certainly did the most for the most different generations, whether you were a Marine that was stationed at Camp Lejeune, or whether you were a victim of a traumatic brain injury. But Bob McDonald did something to make your claims easier. And he also actually answered the phone, which is more than we can say for most VA employees. So I shot Mr. McDonald or Bob an email thanking him. His email is up on the show notes, or will be on the show notes. I don't know if he's still getting them at the VA, but I think for a while they'll forward on. But if you think to send him a thank you note for his service, certainly he did a great thing. Obviously, we can always be better, and hopefully our new secretary will be even better. The new secretary that's been nominated is David Shulkin. He was the, see if I get the terms right, I think he was the undersecretary, one of the undersecretaries for the Veterans Health Administration side. So his background is in health and not necessarily in benefits. And last week I talked, or 2 weeks ago, I guess, we didn't do one last week because of the inauguration, but 2 weeks ago I talked about a concern that when we put somebody in charge of the VA whose focus is health, we tend to lose sight of the benefit side. And when we put somebody in charge of the VA whose history has been with benefits, we tend to lose focus on the health. And so I'm a little bit nervous that putting a guy whose focus has been on the health side of the VA for so many years, an illustrious career with many businesses and with the VA, a little bit concerned that the focus will be too heavy on the health side and not heavy enough on the benefit side. So they kind of go hand in hand for veterans that are trying to get reintegrated into civilian life. We need both. We need medical care and we need the benefits if we're unable to work because of what happened to us in the service. So we'll see how it goes until he gets approved by Congress, and I see no reason why his nomination won't sail through. He was unanimously approved for his position under McDonald back in 2015 by the R's and the D's and the I's alike. You know, everybody approved him, I think, unanimously. There might have been one or two. There's always one or two outlier that's just going to be ornery. But in any event, his nomination is going to sail through, and then we're going to get to work and see what's happening there. But one of the first things that happened before he even came on board. So many of you follow the news. Many of you know that the new administration has put a hiring freeze on federal government employees. And, you know, whatever your political inclinations or economic beliefs, I'm not worried about all that. You can keep those. I don't have one, and even if I did have one, I wouldn't share it on this show. But my concern is that one of the largest segments of employees for the federal government are veterans. 1/3, 1 out of every 3 federal government employees is a veteran. The VA itself has, 623,000 veterans in the civilian federal government posts. That's not counting the military branches, obviously. But looking at the civilian side of the federal government, 623, 1 out of every 3. 1 out of every 3 federal workers is a veteran. And so a freeze is likely to slow down some of the changes that we've seen over the last few years in terms of veterans' employability. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. There's a natural fit between veterans and government service just because we're service-minded people, first of all. Second of all, there's a lot of parallels in what happens in terms of the way of thinking and the structure of things. So I'm a little bit nervous about it. I'm really nervous about the VA because before all this happened, there were 45,000, I've heard two numbers, 45 and 48,000 vacancies at the VA. Most of them are on the health side. The benefits side, there's 10 big job openings that I'm aware of, at least 10. They were looking to hire more veterans law judges at the board so that they can start cutting back on the backlog, and that's no longer going to happen, it seems. So we're going to continue with that backlog. They'll probably push VA appeals reform, which we'll talk about extensively on these live casts and on the blog. But in any event, the concern is that the VA's mission, which is really critical right now, we're at a make or break point. The VA is either going to stick around or it's going to collapse. And if you want it to stick around, we're going to need employees working there, right? And so the acting secretary, Rob Snyder, came out and said, hold on, I have authority to exempt from that hiring freeze any particularly important positions. And there's a special code word in the statutes for it. But he's basically going to allow certain types of public health workers to continue to be hired. That way doctors, nurses, all those folks that the VA truly could use some help with, they're going to still continue to fill those positions. So that's big because since the Shinseki scandal, I think 75% decline in medical personnel coming to work at the VA just because of its reputation. So there's been a big hole at the VA. And this hiring freeze, hopefully if we can get around it with what Rob Snyder has done as acting secretary, if Mr. Shulkin continues that or is able to work within the new administration to lift that freeze at the VA, we'll actually see some folks come on board to help out. So, I know we all have different political bents, and I'm not trying to suggest one way or the other to you. I'm not trying to say your way is right or your way is wrong, but if you want to voice your opinion on this, whether you say, great thing that we're hiring the freeze in place is, and the hiring freeze in place is going to apply to the VA. If you want to call and thank folks for that, you can I'm going to give you some numbers here. I'm going to give you the number of the Capitol Switchboard, U.S. Capitol Switchboard, so you can call your representative, and I'm going to give you the websites for the House and Senate representatives. Call and express your opinion. Either way, I don't care what it is, but certainly the phone is usually the best way to go to get legislators' attention. They're all, some of them, have some really skilled interns that can tweet cute things. But most of them still rely on phone surveys to make their decisions about certain key things. So I'm going to give you those numbers here in a minute. This is important because just the other day, 55 senators joined together across party lines. In fact, it was every senator, every Democratic senator, and 11 Republicans reached out to President Trump and asked him to lift the hiring freeze on the VA to try to make sure that those folks, that there's a guarantee that the medical personnel can get hired. And also to fill some of these mission-critical positions on the benefit side. Anyway, the number for the Capitol Switchboard, and it'll be in the show notes, 202-225-3121. I've called, and you're going to have to wait a little bit on hold until you get the operator and then tell them who your representative is or where you're from, and city and state, and they should be able to patch you through to your representative. If you don't want to sit on hold, even though it's just fantastic hold music, you can go to house.gov/representatives, and it lists them all by state with their phone numbers, or go to senate.gov/senators/contact, and you can listen to or look at the names of all of your senators regardless of your state. Get their numbers, get their website address if you want to send an email into them, whatever the case may be. But I encourage you to be active, voice your opinion, let it be heard. It's going to become very, very crucial that our senators and legislators hear from us because things are moving quickly. And a lot of times when things move quick, we don't think through consequences. And so voice your opinion. I don't care what side of this issue you're on. Voice your opinion, please. In any event, okay. That's the big news. Nothing big other than that. There's been some rumblings about reforms to the VA appeals process. That started in the last Congress. I've heard different stories. I've heard that we're going to ramrod that prior appeals reform package through under the new Congress. And I've also heard that there's a group of VSOs that want to get together to restructure this. I don't know. It depends on who you talk to. Everybody's got an agenda when it comes to politics. And so it's hard to get the straight scoop, and I've heard equal, versions of the same stories, but those are the two big ones. We're either going to ram it through or we're going to start something new, but there's going to be appeals reform. We'll keep you up to date on that as we hear anything. So that being said, I think it's time to move into today's main topic. Before we go, I want you to keep an eye on your emails. If you're subscribing to a Veterans Law Blog email, keep an eye on Facebook. Sometime next week, I'm going to be out for several days. I've got one of my kids has to go into the hospital for a little bit, so I'm going to take some time off. But sometime next week, I expect to get out some information about a webinar that we're going to do in the last week of February. This is going to be a webinar where I'm going to teach you the 5 paths to service connection and how to prove up and get the best impairment rating for any medical condition. I'm going to show you the process that I use for my clients, show you exactly step-by-step how it works. The outline that I've put together has it at 2 hours. So if you know ADDIG, I tend to go over twice as long. So this could be a 3 to 4 hour webinar. But you'll have information about that. Premium members, I've got a bunch of free seats for premium members. So if you're a premium member of the blog, you're going to get an opportunity to join in that webinar for free. So keep your eye out on that. Let us jump into today's topic. Man, that hit the spot. It was water, unfortunately. In any event, we're going to talk today about obesity. So VA claims for obesity. Now, this is a very sensitive topic because of the prejudices and stereotypes and mindsets that exist out there. But obesity is a growing problem in the American population, civilian and veteran. So 36%, a little over 1 out of every 3 Americans are obese. And obese, I'm going to tell you exactly what that means, but obese is grossly overweight. That's the percentage of the regular civilian population. 78% of veterans are grossly overweight or obese. 78%. So if you're a veteran, you are twice as likely to be grossly overweight or obese. And so let's talk a little bit about what that means. So we all know there's a statistic out there. If you're a bodybuilder, if you're into physical fitness, you've heard this before. You may not have if you're not. But it's called the body mass index. And the body mass index, I've got to look at this because it's in metric terms. It's your weight in kilograms divided by your meters squared, your height in meters squared. I think that's right. We'll double check that. I'm always bad with the metric. But the BMI index, it basically works out to a number. And when you divide those two things together, what you get is a single-digit number. And if your index number is 30 or higher, you're considered or diagnosed as obese by medical professionals. So there's some flaws with that particular formula. First of all, who the hell uses a metric formula in the U.S. or metric measurements in the U.S.? Well, you could talk to a lot of construction workers and a lot of electricians who would probably suggest that we probably should be using that. And every time that I work on my motorcycle, I get a little bit pissed off, but because all the bolts on my motorcycle are in metric and all the crap that's in my garage to fix it is all non-metric standard. So in any event, so probably ought to fix that someday, right? But in any event, the problem with using BMI to diagnose obesity is that it's not exactly a true reflection of what's going on. So I represent several clients who are going through and struggling with obesity. One of them is a former bodybuilder, and he's always had a very, very high BMI, not because he's got a lot of fat, but because muscle weighs more than fat, and he's got so much muscle that when you do that formula of weight ratio to height, they think of him as obese when he clearly is not. If you look at other clients and other folks, and you guys all know somebody out there that is not overweight and not obese. I will tell you, look, I mean, I am not a large man. I'm almost 6 feet, 185 pounds, and if you do the math out on that, I come really close to being considered overweight by that medical standard, and that's just simply not the case. I run 30 miles a week. And there's not a part of me that's overweight, yet that medical standard suggests that I'm really close to it. So using body mass index to diagnose obesity is not necessarily accurate, and it also doesn't reflect what this medical condition really truly is all about. So there's a pretty common stereotype out there that says that, if you sit on the couch and do nothing and eat potato chips and drink soda and beer, you're going to get fat. You're going to get obese, and So change your diet, change your exercise routine, and you won't be fat or obese. And that's, I will tell you, that's a pretty simplistic way of looking at things, and it's not entirely accurate. So we know that if you are overweight or if you are obese, that one of the biggest, most powerful tools you have in your arsenal to help that situation is watching and changing your diet, or is developing an exercise program that is appropriate for you. And always work with a doctor when you're coming up with exercise programs. I got a friend of mine who started running recently and had some weight issues and pushed it too hard. Now he's got a stress fracture. So just work with a medical professional, but know that those are really tools. Diet and exercise are tools to help you reduce a weight problem or reduce an obesity problem, and frankly to help cardiovascular fitness as well. But they're not necessarily things that prevent obesity or prevent you from becoming overweight. So, it's not a simplistic you are what you eat kind of thing. And we in the veterans community tend to believe that because we heard that crap all through the military is, don't eat so much, you're going to get fat. And they always were checking to make sure we weren't overweight. And we were regulated in what we could eat in many cases. And so that's kind of ingrained in our brain, is that real simplistic way of thinking that eat a lot, don't exercise, you get fat and overweight and obese. And that's not necessarily the case. So the body is pretty complex. The American Medical Association had a great metaphor. I can't ever remember this quote, so I'm going to read it. It's like 3 sentences long, one sentence with 3 lines. And they came back in 2013, the American Medical Association classified obesity as a disease. And as you're going to see in a minute, that's huge. That is, no pun intended, that's a significant development. And what they said in that report was, the suggestion that obesity is not a disease, but is rather a consequence of a chosen lifestyle, exemplified by overeating and or inactivity, is equivalent to suggesting that lung cancer is not a disease because it was brought about by an individual choice to smoke cigarettes. So, that's a really compelling metaphor right there. Is, your lung cancer is no less a disease based on being caused by smoking or inhalation of particulate matter. The same thing for obesity. It's no more or less a disease depending on how you got it. I mean, if you are one of the rare people that became obese simply because of an eating or an inactivity issue, that doesn't make obesity any less a disease than if it's the result of some metabolic change within your body. And that ultimately is what causes obesity, is it's a significant metabolic or hormonal change inside the body. And it can be brought about by something external, or it can be brought about by something internal. So there's different kinds of obesity. There's exogenous, I'm not a doctor, I can't pronounce all these fancy words, but that's a very common kind of obesity, and it's something that's caused by an external circumstance. So let me give you a couple examples, because these, in a military community, we are faced with hundreds of threats that affect our hormonal and metabolic functioning inside of our body. Vietnam era vets who was exposed to Agent Orange. Agent Orange was a chemical that, when it gets into your bloodstream and gets into your body, changes your hormones structures, and it also changes your body's metabolism. And so there's no surprise that there's a high degree of correlation between Agent Orange exposure and obesity. Particulate matter from the burn pits. If you were over in Iraq, Afghanistan, the Persian Gulf Wars, any time that there were any of those oil fires, or the burn pits that were on every single base and observation post and forward operating base in every part of the Persian Gulf, you're inhaling crap that's getting into your lungs. That particulate matter is affecting your hormones and affecting the way that your body processes nutrients and processes all the things that are necessary for daily life. So your metabolism has changed. And so it's no surprise that we see significant weight gains in soldiers. One of my clients was a firefighter in the military, and going way, way, way back. So this is before a lot of the safety precautions that are in place were in place. And so he was exposed to a lot of smoke inhalation, and almost as soon as he got out of service, he started experiencing a dramatic weight gain, even though there were no other changes in his lifestyle. So there's another one. Think of all the crap that we ate. MREs down to mess hall food. This is not food that is designed necessarily to be healthy. It's designed to give the soldier, the sailor, the airman the energy that they need to stay awake for 18 to 20 hours a day. So if you break down an MRE, it's almost 95% carbs and sugar. and you put too much sugar in a human body, and you're going to cause a metabolic change inside the body that's going to lead to obesity. Other things like the water at Camp Lejeune. You throw benzene and TCEs and PCEs in the water, and when you drink it and it gets into your bloodstream, these chemicals break down and change your genetic structure sometimes. That's a little bit of an extreme statement, but it has a pretty significant change inside your body that can ultimately result in changes in your metabolism, changes in the way your hormones respond. Sometimes that results in a cancer. Sometimes it's going to result in obesity. Sometimes it's going to result in obesity, but it's masking another condition because we don't thoroughly understand the medical conditions that are the cause of the disease of obesity. So, in any event, soldiers, sailors, airmen are all at a high degree of risk because of the work and the lifestyles that we had in the military to becoming obese. And now the VA recognizes this on some level. They have to. I mean, I've read the clinical guidelines for the diagnosis of and treatment of obesity inside the VA, and it's basically a policy statement of the VA. It's not anything really earth-shattering, but in this case it is. Because the VA recognizes in this document, they come right out and they say that obesity is a, quote, chronic disease. So for the health side, they recognize it as a chronic disease. Here's another quote from that same clinical guidelines. It says, the active military and veteran populations have been similarly affected by the obesity epidemic. In fact, we know from the numbers I quoted to you before, it's 200%. It's more significantly impacted. But they say obesity is a chronic disease requiring lifelong commitment to treatment and long-term maintenance. So that's right out of the 2015 VA clinical guidelines for the diagnosis and treatment of obesity. It's an expensive condition. Obesity costs in the VA system, about $370 per patient per year. So if you do the basic math, we've got 21 million veterans, roughly, it might be 24 million now, but let's stick with 21 million, $370 a pop, 78% of veterans had an overweight or an obesity issue. You work that out, that's $6.8 billion in healthcare costs. $6.8 billion in healthcare costs for the veterans. And certainly that is going to start impacting the VA's bottom line, but it explains what I'm going to tell you about right here, as the benefit side looks very differently at obesity than the health side, which I find, I'm not going to talk too much about this. My firm has some pretty active cases where we're pushing hard on obesity-related service connection claims. And so I don't want to reveal too much of our strategy, knowing well that there are VA folks and VA attorneys that probably pop in on these videos from time to time. So I'm not going to reveal strategies there, but I will tell you that up until January 6th, there was a very clear path to service connecting obesity, and it did happen. And basically it meant showing the same things that you show in a normal service connection claim. In addition, we talked about obesity in the past on the blog, about obesity as a bridge claim. So if you have PTSD and then you have a heart condition, and the thing that links those two together is obesity, your PTSD impacts your metabolism very clearly. Very clearly. There's no question about that. Your metabolism changes and causes significant weight gains that trend towards obesity. And obesity is a clear gate opener or doorway to heart disease and millions and millions of medical, millions is an exaggeration, billions and billions. A lot of medical conditions are caused by obesity. So, up until then, we could make claims for obesity, and in some cases you could get them granted. In a lot of cases, and as you'll see, you're still able to do the second one where you use obesity as a bridge claim. But that all changed. So a lot of veterans were getting denied. The Board of Veterans Appeals asked the Office of General Counsel for a legal opinion on whether or not obesity was a service-connectable disease. And not surprisingly, the Office of General Counsel came back with a precedential opinion that said obesity is not a service-connected disease or disability, or is not rateable for VA service connection purposes. And they also undercut the idea of using obesity as a bridge claim a little bit in that opinion. Now, the VA's Office of General Counsel, that's the VA's attorneys. And so, just like any other situation with a business or a company that has, or even private individuals, so long as they listen to their attorneys, when the Office of General Counsel issues a precedential opinion, the VA is bound to follow it. So the benefit side, the Board of Veterans Appeals, they're bound to follow it, and I'm not entirely sure how that impacts the health side, but I know very clearly that from this point forward, if you file a claim for service connection of obesity, the very first thing that's going to happen is the VA regional office is going to deny it. If you appeal that to the board, the very next thing that's going to happen is the Board of Veterans Appeals is going to deny it, and they're going to cite to this precedential opinion. I'm going to publish it up on the show notes so you can link through and read it for yourself. That precedential opinion does not carry as much weight when you get into the court. So when you get into the Veterans Court or the Fed Circuit, those opinions are only as powerful as their ability to persuade. So I want you to take a look at that opinion, see if you're persuaded. I will say this. I will say that that precedential opinion reads to me like a lawyer trying to argue with the American Medical Association's decision to define obesity as a disability, rather than explaining why it's not covered under the particular statute or law. But that's all I'm going to say at this point. We've got a few cases. If your board hearing resulted in a denial of obesity, a board decision denying obesity, the show notes will have my law firm's contact info. We're not taking every case, but I will tell you that the firm is looking at some select cases to start taking to push that forward. So look at the show note for that contact information. Particularly interested in board decisions of all kinds involving obesity, so that we can start looking and seeing if there's a way to start cracking through this wall. But in any event, there are some interesting things out there, because the idea that the VA has this precedential opinion out there does not necessarily mean that you should stop filing claims. It does not necessarily mean that you should stop trying to prove them. It does not mean you should stop trying to win them, because there's any number of things that could happen. Somebody could ask for a rule to be issued, a regulation interpreting the 38 United States Code or Title 38 of the U.S. Code to define whether or not, as a rule, as a matter of federal regulation, whether obesity should be classified as a disability or disease. That could happen. It very could easily that even while I'm looking through all these cases and working at a couple of them at the court, another law firm could beat me to it and could get the Veterans Court or the Fed Circuit. Not the Supreme Court yet, because I'm not sure that there's even had any that have trickled up to that level yet. I'm not aware of any petitions for writ of cert at the Supreme Court involving obesity as a disease in VA claims land. So the Fed Circuit, Court of Appeals could either or both could come out and say that the VA is wrong and that it is a disease or disability. And if that's the case, you're going to want to have continued to prosecute your claim or prosecute your appeal without missing any deadlines so that you can get that earliest possible effective date. So, in the meantime, though, it's more likely that you're going to get denied. Keep pushing. And I want to share with you two cases that are in the body of Veterans Court law to give you an idea of some of the different ways you should and should not approach, or should at least consider approaching for your obesity claim, or for your condition that results from obesity, or from the service-connected condition that causes obesity. So the first case was one called Eldridge, and everybody looks at Eldridge, and everybody, I think, I'm kind of an outlier on this, so surprise, surprise there. But a lot of folks look to Eldridge, which was a 2012 case. The cause number will be up in the show notes, and you can look it up on the court's website. It's widely held to stand for the rule that obesity is not a service-connectable disease. But if you look at that case closely, what happened is, here we've got an Agent Orange exposed Vietnam veteran, boots on the ground, Republic of Vietnam, 72 to 74. Right after discharge, he was diagnosed with exogenous, or somebody with medical expertise, tell me how to pronounce that word, with external obesity, externally caused obesity. The doctor, I'm going to read you a quote because I think this really truly says it best about most forms of obesity. There's no known internal organic cause for the obesity. It's usually almost always something external that triggers a hormonic or metabolic change in the body. But in any event, he filed his claim, the board denied him, and they basically came out with the same old trope that obesity is not a disorder subject to service connection by Title 38. And the VA's attorneys backed him, and the court was persuaded by the VA's attorneys, and they came out, and basically the holding of that case was that they agreed that the board presented a plausible explanation for why it was not service connectable under the facts of that case. Okay, now it doesn't specifically limit it to the facts of that case, but if you look and you kind of think about what the court was doing in that particular case, there's a really good argument that can be made that Eldridge stands more for the proposition that we all know is true, that the court does not have the ability to tell the VA to put a disease on the table of ratings. That's a no-brainer right there, and I think if you read Eldridge pretty closely, I think that's the narrow holding of that case. But as with all things, lawyers tend to argue, and over time that argument becomes reality, and so this case stands for the holding that obesity is not a disease or a disability. No, the only thing that it really truly stands for is that the court can't tell the VA to put it on the schedule of ratings. That does not mean it's not a disease or disability. It's a really, really important distinction. And that came up in another case, totally unrelated. Actually, it came out a little bit before Eldridge, was a case called Hunt. Now, Hunt is interesting because the Hunt case is non-precedential. In other words, it was a single-judge decision. It's not one that can be relied on for its legal value. It can be relied on for its reasoning, which I think is huge, because the veteran in this case was arguing that PTSD aggravated his weight situation, such that it caused him to become obese. Filed his claim, VA denied it with that same old trope about it's not a service-connectable disease. Anyway, the court looked at all this, and in response to that argument, they said this, and I want to read this to you because it's pretty important. I'm going to go a little slow on this. They said that applicable VA regulations use the term disability to refer to the average impairment in earning capacity resulting from diseases or injuries encountered as a result of or incident to military service. It's a standard proposition. Standard proposition is that the whole idea behind the VA benefits system is that it's meant to compensate for disabilities that result from something that happened in service. Not diseases, not conditions, disabilities, limitations. And those limitations specifically have to relate to the loss of earning capacity. My plug just came undone. I'm going to bend down and grab that cord. Hold on one second. The last thing I want to have happen in the middle of this video is to run out of battery, run out of juice, because then we're all in big trouble. Not really. It's just a really good video, I think. So, in any event, so they continued in that case. The court said, the question, therefore, in Mr. Hunt's case is whether his obesity is a disability, a condition causing an impairment in earning capacity. That's how the court, in this non-precedential decision, interpreted the statute that says what service connection is meant to do. So there's some reasoning in the Veterans Court jurisprudence that says that obesity could possibly be a disability if you can show that there is an impairment in your earning capacity. And the court went on and said, in this case, there's no such evidence, so we're denying it. It's like the old vaudeville routine. Who wins the car? I win the car. Why? Question is moot. That's essentially what they did there. They said that obesity could be a disease if you show them earnings capacity, but there's no earnings capacity evidence, so it's moot. But those three sentences right there, and they're on this last week's post about obesity. You can get that. Members can pull down that post and read this quote, get all the links to everything they need. It really drives home the point of what you should be proven or attempting to prove. So as we are working to try to get the court to find that obesity, whether it's the Fed Circuit or whether it's the Veterans Court, to find that obesity is a disease or disability subject to service connection and compensation from the VA, y'all are going to be working these claims up. And so what do you put in as evidence? You need to keep these things going, so you need to put a lot of evidence in them and continue to argue that evidence wasn't considered to keep the claim going until there's a change. I can tell you also that there is a group that has started working with select congressmen to try to get it written into a statute. I don't know that that's going to be successful. It's very rare that Congress is going to write a statute about a particular medical condition. But in any event, it gives some weight to the idea, no pun intended, that, not at all, I don't know why I'm making all these horrible puns, but it gives some impetus to the idea that this is something that really needs to be addressed by the VA. It's a veterans' health issue. It's a veterans' health issue. I mean, it just is no more clear than that. And if it's a veterans' health issue, the VA should be looking at it and taking care of it. I listen to Tammy Duckworth get on a podcast, very good on the podcasts. Listen to Tammy Duckworth on a podcast. I think it was David Axelrod's podcast. Really great one, by the way. He does some great interviews, really calming interview style. But in any event, she was talking about why she opposed the privatization of VA healthcare. She said the number one reason is that the VA is specialists, are specialists in the treatment of veterans. So if a veteran goes in and is diagnosed with diabetes, the VA doctors are most times going to know, wait, there's guys served in Vietnam, or was in Thailand, there's some other issues, we might want to look at other medical conditions, they can run tests, start looking at things, and maybe catch something early. And that was her argument, was that there's more familiarity with medical conditions and their impact and their treatment as it relates to a veteran that civilian world doctors may not catch. And to some degree, there's some truth in that, but it falls apart when you look at something like obesity, where, and frankly, if you look at every condition that the VA has finally accepted as being caused by Agent Orange, we've had to fight tooth and nail for it. Excuse my language there, it just pisses me off. 45 years later, we're still fighting to prove that the Agent Orange killed people. But in any event, it makes me mad when I see the VA rolling out this lie and that we're here to provide this excellent health care for veterans because we know the veterans' needs. And here's one that's affecting 78% of the damn veterans out there, right? And they're ignoring it, saying it's not an issue. We're not going to help with it. I have a fundamental problem with that. I probably need to tone down my language a little bit on that because I get kind of mad. And I wanted to drop a couple of F-bombs, but the last time I did that on a video, I regretted it. So I don't have the ability to hit the little beep button here. In any event, what do you do then? Practically speaking, because that's what the blog is all about. I could complain, we could get mad, we could do all that stuff, but the Veterans Law blog is not about complaining. It's not about whining about the VA. We're all allowed to do that, and we'll do that, and I do it, and I just did it. But really what we're about is practical tools to improve your claim. So how do you improve your obesity claim while we're working on this fight to try to get it recognized as a service-connected and service-connectable condition? Okay, a couple of things. So the very first thing is load up that file with lay evidence. And I'm talking quality lay evidence. I'm not talking this 21, 41, 38 bullshit. I'm talking about get some good sworn declarations that walk through the chronology of your weight gain, first and foremost. So if you started gaining weight in the military, first of all, 90% of the time there's going to be a record of that because every time you go into a doctor's office, the first thing that they do is they have you step on a scale, right after they take your blood pressure. So go back and make a chart. Date, weight, date, weight, date, weight. Pop that stuff into an Excel spreadsheet and create a chart. Attach a sworn declaration to it that shows all your calculations so you can show that chart. Most times when you chart it out, you can see a dramatic increase starting to occur in service. So get that in there. And then what I want you to do is I want you to get lay evidence again, talking about how your obesity, if it's gotten to the level of obesity, or if you think it will in the next 2 to 5 years, which is when this fight over obesity as a service-connected claim is going to occur, then start doing it now. But start writing down how it's impacting your ability to get a job. There's several ways that can happen. So if you are a construction worker, it's going to be very difficult for you to keep up with the pace of work in most cases if you're obese, right? If you are, there's a lot of industries out there where there is a lot of prejudice about overweight people. Frankly, you hear it all the time in any workplace, but there's a lot of places where, if you're in the fashion industry and you're overweight, if you're in some sort of an artistic community, it's probably going to be harder for you to find work because there's a lot of pre-existing stereotypes. And I don't mean to slam those communities at all. I'm just kind of stating what I've heard, talking to folks. So this isn't my opinion. This is just relating stuff. I used to also do employment discrimination law before I started doing veterans disability. And I can tell you that at that time, you really couldn't assert a claim for discrimination based on weight. Now you might be able to. The AMA has recognized it as a disease because it could come under the Americans with Disabilities Act. But I can tell you almost assuredly that I firsthand know of situations where people were fired because some trumped up excuse that turned out the real cause tended to be because they just didn't want overweight people in the workplace. If you have heart problems that result from your weight situation, if you have medical issues that are causing you to be out of work all the time or you can't get a job because of all that treatment, or if you're so overweight that you cannot function outside of the house, document that stuff in a sworn declaration. Get it in your file as soon as possible and start making the arguments. Get medical evidence from your doctor. Talk to your doctor what's causing this. Get tests. Figure it out. It is not, like I said earlier, don't necessarily accept. Now, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not giving you medical advice, but if somebody just comes and says, oh, you're just eating too many potato chips, you may want to get a second opinion on that. Have somebody take a look and see what's causing this, especially if what they tell you isn't jiving with reality. So if somebody says, Attic, you're overweight because, you're not physically fit enough. And it's like, well, first of all, I'm not overweight. And second of all, I'm physically fit because I'm running 30 miles a week, right? No, I don't know. I mean, I might not be 100% physically fit because I don't do much else besides that. But the point is, if somebody was to tell me that my weight gain was because I was not physically active, I would call bullshit on that. And so when your doctor is telling you something that doesn't make sense, do a little bit more testing. See if you can explore the underlying metabolic or hormonal causes, or hormonal change, that's causing the obesity. And then document that. So the next thing is talk about, get medical and lay evidence when your obesity does one of two things. It's either affected by a service-connected condition or caused by, or when your obesity makes a service-connected condition worse or makes treatment of that impossible or difficult, right? Because those are all service connection theories, aggravation and secondary theories. Get that evidence in the file. Take your time. You got time while we're making this fight, the legal fight, but get it in there nonetheless. Don't miss any of your deadlines. And if you do get a BVA decision finding that they're not going to service connect either obesity or a condition caused by or aggravated by or that aggravates obesity, please reach out to a lawyer. I mean, certainly I'll put my firm's contact info. You can reach out to them, but please don't make me be the only one you contact because I'm not the right attorney for everybody. As I tell you in the book that I publish on how to choose a VA claims attorney, which is a free book on the blog, talk to several attorneys. You might find one you like better. You might find one that is more your style. You might find one that's able to do things that I'm not. So talk to a lot of attorneys, but definitely don't go to the Veterans Court without an attorney. Don't do it. You're going to probably lose. I read these decisions every day when they come out, and the majority of veterans that go pro se at the Veterans Court lose. 3 out of 4 veterans that go to the Veterans Court with an attorney as a representative get at least a remand, if not a reversal. So your odds are better at getting that thing back to get it fixed. And that's not because attorneys are smart people. It's just because of the way things are set up at courts. Courts are very legal, structured, process-driven arguments based on burdens of proof and facts in the record, not arguing and trying to put more in the record. So a lot of veterans get to the court and they start, thinking that it's like they're going to get a jury trial or the judge is going to hear new evidence, and really it's a legal argument. And judges are very particular about legal arguments. We all know that no judge in any court in this country is going to make your argument for you. So even if it's staring them right in the face, in most cases, unless you've got a judge that's really feeling generous, in most cases, if you don't make the argument, they're not going to go find it for you. So get an attorney to make those arguments. We see these cases all the time where we can make more arguments than most lay individuals can. And I don't mean to insult anybody. I'm not doing that at all. What I am saying is you're going to get better results 75% of the time at the Veterans Court hiring an attorney. In any event, so keep focused there. And let me know if you have questions about obesity. I know that since I've been posting on this, we've been getting flooded with it on the Veterans Law blog. Again, the priority support is going to members, and it goes to purchase support first, and then we're getting into the claims issues. So if you do have questions, shoot them in. Shoot them in using the green support button, and let me know what they are, and I can see if I can expand on them, post comments on the blog. I read most of the comments. We don't post most of them because a lot of them have private information in them, and I just don't believe in sharing somebody's private medical information. But I do take the information from the comments on the blog posts and turn them into other posts. And in many cases, I do respond directly to the individual if I can do so without giving legal advice. So definitely check out those resources. Let me know if you have any questions. So that takes us out of today's main topic. And I went way over what I thought I was going to do on a main topic, which means that my decision to cut us to 3 questions was probably pretty smart. All right, so first question is from Lee W., who writes, I've had 20 TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, according to outside hospitals and doctors. Yet VA doctors continually state I have never had a TBI, and there is no evidence of one. In light of the current scandal, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, I wonder if I should see external care for all my TBIs, or if trying to see the VA is better? Now, I can't answer that last question. That is a personal choice. Where you get your health care is a personal decision. I tend to be of the mind that I like doctors that explain things to me in a way that connect with reality. And so when they tell me something that doesn't make sense, or when they tell me something that seems too aggressive, I tend to get a second opinion. I personally no longer seek care from the VA. I've just seen too much. And frankly, I'm a little bit worried if I went under the knife there, one of these docs would have seen one of these videos where I slam them a little bit. But don't do what I do. Make your own decision. Decide whether the VA doctors are giving you something that you think matches reality, or whether you trust the private doctors more. There's always the question about finances when it comes to health care, and we've all got to make those financial decisions in our life about prioritizing. And so I can't tell you what to do, but I personally place a premium on making sure that I get good medical care when I need it. So when it comes to that part of the question, that's what I would say is consider going where you get the medical care that takes care of you, first of all, and that you believe and that you trust. And for many of you, that is the VA. You know, I had a client one time that called me up, and this is going back several years, and he said, "Chris, I'm going to fire you as my attorney if you don't stop bashing the VA. They took care of me, they saved my life, this and that." I recognize that many veterans get really awesome care from the VA. Many of us do not. And so there's a real deep schism between those two groups. And so the one thing that puts us all together is that we are all responsible for our own bodies. So go out and get the medical care from wherever you can, as long as that medical care is actually fixing the problem or helping you understand the problem and make sense. You know, I had a baseball injury many years ago and just had some problems in my throwing arm. And I went into a doctor, and the very first thing out of his mouth was, "Well, we're going to cut on it. We're going to open up. We're going to do surgery." And that didn't fit with my approach. I'm not a big fan, first of all, of surgery. I think anesthesia is black magic. And anytime that I know anybody going on their anesthesia, I'm always convinced they're never going to come out. So that didn't jive with my sense of reality. I went and sought two other opinions. And turns out that one of them, who did a nerve conduction test on that arm, recommended yoga. I did yoga, and I've never had a problem with my arm again. So, I mean, I stopped playing baseball 3 years after that, so I didn't have the stress on it. But for those 3 years, it wasn't a problem. So that's my point. It's not that yoga's great, but my point is listen to the people that tell you the things that work and that you trust. Now, onto the TBI piece of that within the VA sector, though. There's some things you should know. So what is a traumatic brain injury? You know, in the military, we talked about the brain housing group, you know, your skull. In between your skull and your brain, there's for lack of a better explanation, there's membranes and a small amount of fluid that separates your brain from the side of your skull, the inside of your skull. And so when you suffer an impact to your head, you can damage the physical structure of the brain if it's hard enough that it causes that membrane to collapse and actually causes contact with the brain. And so a traumatic brain injury is different from a head wound, because a head wound typically involves the opening of the skin or the skull and affecting the brain that way. A traumatic brain injury has to do more with a substantial traumatic contact between the brain and the skull. And I'm really kind of stuttering through this because it's a difficult concept, but think of it that way. So you can have an overlap between the two, but the consequences of traumatic brain injuries are pretty significant. So you can have mild ones. You know, we've all had an occasion where we were fixing something under a table and stood up and whacked our head and got, saw stars and got a little bit dizzy. Technically, that could be a traumatic brain injury. Depends on whether or not the trauma caused injury to the brain, right? So there's a mild example. Now, football players, 100 times a game. How many games a year, how many seasons does the average football player play? All those concussive events and all those wounds are direct shots to the head and tackles and working there on the offensive line and all that sort of stuff adds up over time and can cause significant problems with vision, smell, hearing. There's a movie out there about a disease called CTE, which basically, traumatic injury to the brain caused changes or a disease inside the brain that mimics the symptomatology and the consequences, frankly, of PTSD. There's a lot of football players that committed suicide as a result of CTE, and there was one doctor that figured it out and almost got railroaded out of the profession, according to the movie. It's a Will Smith movie. It's a fantastic movie, man, fantastic acting. If you get a chance, take a look. But that's what a traumatic brain injury is. It's a traumatic injury to the brain caused by essentially a significant contact with the brain. It doesn't have to be physical either. It can be a concussive sound. So, for example, let's say you're downrange and your buddy's like, I'm going to pull the cord on this 155 millimeter howitzer and scare the crap out of my buddy, and that concussion hits nearby, and you're fortunate I'm creating this ridiculous scenario to prove the point. And IED goes off. Better scenario. The concussion from that explosion can cause a traumatic brain injury. A tank patch can slam down on your head. That can cause a traumatic brain injury, with or without a helmet. In some cases, it might be more severe depending on the angles because of the helmet. But that said, those are all the types of things that are traumatic brain injuries. And to get benefits for that on the disability compensation side, you have to be able to show it's service-connected, obviously, and then it has to be diagnosed, and then it has to be evaluated. And so the diagnosis and the evaluation can only be done by 4 types of doctors. And I'm not going to go through them all here. It's all in the blog posts. The VA for many, many years, from 2007 to 2015, did not use these 4 types of doctors all the time. And as a result of that, they were using things like nurse practitioners, and in one case that I saw, a child psychologist. I don't know why the VA is employing child psychologists in the first place. Horrible joke I could have just made there, but I'm going to pass on it. But she diagnosed TBI. And so there's a big problem with non-qualified medical professionals or non-qualified non-medical professionals diagnosing a condition they don't know squat about. And so the end result of that was folks were getting lowballed in their ratings, and in some cases not getting service-connected for TBI. And when you're not service-connected, in many situations you may find yourself unable to get the health care from the VA unless you get up to a higher rating level for other reasons. So back in June of 2016, Secretary McDonald, one of the awesome things that he did, granted something called equitable relief. So a good buddy of mine up in Minnesota, Ben Krause, who's an attorney, a veteran himself, many of you follow his site, disabledveterans.org. He pushed really hard on a particular case where a veteran's traumatic brain injury was not diagnosed by one of the appropriate professionals. And this story gained traction. There was a news group picked it up in a media organization up in Minnesota. A group down in Texas picked it up, and it became national news that the VA is diagnosing and treating or not treating TBIs, as the case may be, by using non-qualified personnel. So in June of 2016, Secretary McDonald came out and said this isn't right. Over 24,000 veterans, probably more than that, frankly, not counting the ones that weren't properly diagnosed, were impacted. And he said that if you had a TBI medical exam by the VA in connection with a VA disability claim between 2007 and 2015, you're going to be able to get a reevaluation if you can show that it wasn't one of those 4 doctors. So reach out to the VA. There's some information on my website. I'll have the links in the show notes to give you all the details. But generally speaking, to answer Lee's question, if the VA is not diagnosing your TBI and you think it's because they didn't use the right kind of doctor, you should get a new exam. This has been a really, really superficial analysis of this, and if Ben's watching this right now, he's probably going to be texting me here in a minute to be, Attic, shut up. You're talking too generally. You're overlooking the important stuff. But in any event, I want to direct you to his site where you can get all the important stuff, because he is, I'd call this guy the TBI guru. When I have problems on TBI cases, I will call him because he knows a lot more than I do. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. One of his best posts goes back to May of 2014, and he lays out a whole bunch of information, some indications of why, how you can tell if you've been lowballed on a rating, all the different things that the doctor should be looking at to properly and fully rate your TBI, the medical professionals that should be looking at it, the training that they should have. Ben goes into some really significant detail. I will put the link up in the show notes so that you can get to that site. And if you have an issue with a VA TBI claim and you've gotten denied on appeal, reach out to Ben. His law firm, he's got a law firm just like I do. He's also does disabledveterans.org, which is his media-based site, talking about some of the problems with within the VA and other aspects of veterans disability law. But his law firm's website is benjaminkrauselaw.com. Check it out. Ask for a consultation. There's nobody out there, I think, that knows more about TBIs from a legal perspective than Ben. So reach out to him. All right, let's see. We are running low on time. I've got 10 minutes, so I'm going to trim this down to one more question. All right. Good. And the only reason I'm saying I got 10 minutes more, normally I'd stay here and talk till 5, but I got a date with a treadmill. So I'm actually running the Chicago Marathon this October, and I've got a speed goal this time. So when I ran New York last year, my goal was to finish. My goal this year, I want to hit a particular time, and so I'm trying to be real religious with my training to make sure that I build the right foundation. And when I start skipping days on the treadmill in the winter time here or out on the track in the summer, then I start missing those speed times and end up losing on my goal. So I'm definitely going to not miss that today. Let's answer this one last question. Maybe if I didn't yak so much, I can get through this stuff quicker, right? All right. In any event, so this is from Kyle T. This question. It says, I have an appeal decision pending status on my account on eBenefits. My claim was certified to the BVA in March of 2016. Can I terminate my attorney and hire an attorney at this time? So his question completely changed gears on me. So there's actually two questions in that. The first one, and the reason I picked this question was because of the question about what the eBenefits status meant. So eBenefits, you all know it, eBenefits.gov, you can go in there, you can sign up with an ID, and in theory, you can get information about your claims and your medical care from the VA documentation through that site. I have found anything but that, although I have also found that I'm not the best test case for things because I think sometimes that because of this blog and because of my law firm, I think sometimes the VA screws with me a little bit. Surprise there, right? But I will tell you that I can't make heads or tails of eBenefits status codes. I can't. My own claim, which I do something unique with my claims. So I teach you all how to push your claims, and I make sure that I push my own clients' claims and appeals. With mine, I let it ride. I just let things go and take their normal flow. I don't push things. I don't try to accelerate it. For a couple of reasons, but the primary reason is I want to experience that process from the typical veteran's perspective. So this claim dates back to 2007. I filed this claim. I filed several. This is one that has continued to drift on, and it's a very, very, very simple tinnitus claim. Had a hearing at the board in 2015 and still waiting on a decision for it. Very straightforward, small, simple claim. But it's taken this long. And throughout this time period on eBenefits, for the last 3 years, really, up until this past December, the claim status was that it had issued a BVA decision. And the date of the decision that the BVA issued, allegedly, predates the actual date I filed the claim. So that, in a nutshell, I think explains my confusion about eBenefits, and probably yours too. The status codes don't seem to make sense. They're not clear. It just changed in December to pending BVA adjudication. What does that status mean? You can look up on their explanation. Does that mean the decision's coming out soon? I don't know. Does that mean that I, should expect to get a remand or whatever, or what, 6 months, a year? Who the hell knows? There's no rhyme or reason to it. In fact, I can call up the board and ask them what this status means, and almost any board status in eBenefits, if you call up the board and ask them what the status code means, they're going to be like, the judge is going to get to it. The judge will get to it. That's their explanation. So, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to eBenefits, and so I really can't tell you what those codes mean. If you really want to know the status of your board appeal, call the BVA. Call them. Here's the number, 1-800-923-8387. 1-800-923-8387. Their hold music is not that good. If you don't want to use the toll-free number, it ends up in the same place, but call 202-632-4623. That's Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Check out and just ask them. Don't ask them to explain the eBenefit status because they're going to give you the same old nonsense. Ask them what the status is. Ask them if it's been certified. Ask them if it's been assigned to a judge. Has it been docketed? When is the hearing going to be scheduled for? When is your next hearing block at my regional office? Ask specific questions like that and push a little bit and you'll get more accurate answers. But the part of Kyle's question that I can't answer is about should I fire my attorney now that I've got a pending appeal decision pending status in eBenefits. Here's the deal. You can hire and you can fire an attorney. Well, in the real world, you can hire anytime you want. You can fire anytime you want. In VA world, you're only going to be able to get an attorney hired once you're denied. And that's just because the VA doesn't allow attorneys to collect compensation or to get paid for our work at the regional office. And so, and frankly, VSOs are better situated at that level currently anyway. There will come a day where Congress will lighten up that restriction and you'll start seeing claims move a lot quicker because I think attorneys know how to prove things up a lot quicker. But for right now, most attorneys that work at the regional office are doing so on all of them should be doing it on a pro bono basis, and meaning no charge. And my firm does handle quite a few pro bono cases, but we only reserve that time for some vets in the most horrible situations. And most times it involves a homeless veteran. So I'm not going to drop a case and work a case for nothing for a vet that's just trying to connect the hearing loss, who's working and got a job and doing great. I'm going to look at that other veteran that's trying to get some money to be able to get a home because he's homeless and give my pro bono time there. So a lot of attorneys think that same way. So my point being, you can't necessarily hire an attorney until you get denied by the VA. But you can fire one anytime. You can fire an attorney anytime you want to. An attorney cannot withdraw from your case once the appeal has been certified to the board. An attorney cannot withdraw on their own without getting the board's approval. Or if they're at the court, we can't do it without getting the court's approval. The general standard, and it's a little bit more complex than this in the board level, and certainly at the court we've got to make a better argument, but the general standard is good cause shown. I will tell you 100% of the time, a client firing an attorney is good cause for that attorney to withdraw, because nobody wants to work with an attorney that they've just fired, and nobody's going to make you work with that attorney. So the question, though, is when should you fire an attorney? And frankly, my standard answer to that is not until you have another one. Because if you really want to work with an attorney, you just don't like the one that you're working with, call around and get some second opinions. Just know, and I'll put the link to this post in the show notes, there are a lot of attorneys out there that don't want to give second opinions. And so they will tell you things like, oh, you're represented by an attorney, you've got to fire that attorney first before I could talk to you. I know of no state bar, I know of no state law that says that an attorney cannot talk to somebody represented by an attorney if that person only wants a second opinion on their legal claim. There are rules. There are state bar ethical rules. There are state laws that say I, as an attorney, cannot talk to you if I know you to be represented and I can't talk to you directly about that matter, but it's not in the context of a second opinion. It's in the context of if our clients are suing each other, or if we think our clients might sue each other, or in situations where it's going to create pressure on the person who's represented by an attorney to take an action without their attorney present. And the very reason that a person goes and gets a second opinion about an attorney, they don't want their other attorney present. Because most of the time there's a bad relationship, there's a bad dynamic, there's problems in the case that aren't getting resolved. And the last thing that you want there is the problem, the attorney that you think is a problem, talking to the attorney that you want to hire, because that's just going to make shit harder, right? So call and get a second opinion. Just be alert and aware that many attorneys will refuse to give you that second opinion, and that's okay. That's their decision. They're entitled to say no. They're not entitled to lie to you and tell you that the law is that they can't by law. And frankly, if I'm wrong on that, if you know of a state bar or if you know of a state law that says that clients are not allowed to get second opinions if they're represented by an attorney, please let me know about that. I'd love to see that. That way I could correct what I'm saying if I'm wrong, but I don't know of one. So in any event, you can fire your attorney at any time, but you should wait until you have another one lined up. And particularly if you're waiting on a board decision, there's no real reason, unless you've got some other claim going below or appeal going on that you want to get somebody on board. The VA only recognizes one attorney at a time, which is shameful if you ask me. I mean, you should be able to hire two attorneys. Frankly, if you want to hire me for a sleep apnea claim and you want to hire Matt Hill for PTSD and Ben Krause for TBI, you should be able to do that. You should be able to hire your attorneys that are best suited for each particular condition, not one attorney for all your claims. But in any event, the VA does not yet recognize more than one attorney per veteran, essentially. So get another attorney lined up and then replace your attorney. if that's what you want to do. I don't think it's a wise idea to fire somebody without having somebody else on backup, particularly at the time of a board decision, because that could go, several ways. You can get a remand, in which case you're going to want that attorney to monitor some timelines for you. If you could get denied, in which case you might want that attorney to take it to court. You may want another attorney to take it to court, but you definitely want to keep your attorney until you have one lined up, is my thinking. Different people think different ways. Make the decision that's best for you, and go forward from there. So, in any event, looking at my notes, making sure I got everything. That's about it for today, folks. Today, we've got 2 coupon codes that I'm going to give you. The first coupon code, and these are good through February 3rd. I may end up extending them. We're going to have to see how the surgery goes next week for my kid. If I end up having to take some more time off, I might extend these out a little further. We won't have a live cast in that case, but I'm definitely going to try to get back and do next week's live cast. So February 3rd is when these expire. $20 off an annual membership. An annual premium membership, you can get a $20 discount. Use coupon code February with all small letters. No quotes, no parentheses, just the word February. Not even a capital F, all small letters. And then if you want, we've got a new video training course out there. We did it as a webinar back in December. It's a 3-hour training course, 10 lessons in it, over 14 handouts. We'll walk you through step by step how to get your C-file, how to use it when you get it. Why you need to get it, the reasons you'll want to, who's looking at it and why they're looking at it, how they use it. You're going to get a lot of information in this course, 3 hours of video in 10 lessons, so you can take it in small bites or you can sit down and do it all at once. But that video is now for sale up on the blog, and you can get $20 off with coupon code GROUNDHOG. So February 2nd is Groundhog's Day. We find out if we get more winter or more winter. Or, in the case of global warming, less winter. In any event, $20 off that video training package, and coupon code is Groundhog. Those will be up in the show notes. So I just want, last thing to let you know, remind you, if you have a veteran that you think I should talk to on my podcast, send me an email, podcast@veteranslawblog.org. If you have an idea about the podcast, send it to me. If you've got a name idea, as I mentioned, pretty significant prize for those folks or gift for those folks that give me the name that I use. But let me know what you think about it, and we'll get that launched in April, and keep an eye out in your email for the webinar coming up at the end of February. Listen, I enjoyed spending Friday afternoon with you. I'm going to go hit the gym and go for a run. Y'all, hope you have a great weekend. Hope wherever you are, the weather is great, or poor if you like bad weather for whatever reason. I hope you get the exact weekend you want. Have a great time, and we will see you hopefully next Friday.